let's get to Cody, because I know we talk, like you said, Sammy all day long, but I want to hear, how did you get to where you are? I mean, people don't realize how
Yeah.
much goes in behind the scenes to even start a podcast and then to get noticed.
Yeah.
So I want to hear this, how this happened.
Yeah. So, God, it's such a long story, man. Like I, where I grew up, my parents divorced when I was 2. So I didn't necessarily have like a great influence from anyone on like career wise on what I should do growing up. Like both, I was the first person in my family to go to college and graduate, which was something I took a lot of pride in. A lot
Yeah.
of like, I was very proud of myself when I graduated from Eastern Illinois. And I did that in 2015. But before then, I graduated high school in 2009. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I helped most of my high school career. I did not think I was going to go to college. My ACT score is way too embarrassing to share with people on the internet. Like I did not try because I just did not think I was going to go to college. And so I graduated high school, and my mom just she told me, she's like, you should just take some like general courses, that way you can have something, you can go if it maybe you change your mind. And the thing was is that neither one of my parents influenced me into even going to college or anything career wise. My mom was just always like, you got to go get a job. You got to do something, right? And so I actually like learned how to I learned what it was like to be an adult pretty early, because when I graduated high school, I picked up a job at a Kroger, which is like a Mariano's version here in Chicago. They're owned by the same company at least, and I was stocking shelves. I stocked shelves at this grocery store for 2 years. And I took some online courses while in the process, very part-time level. Not like it took me 3 years to accumulate like 30 credits. Okay. So I did that. And during that process, I realized that I hate that job and that I did not want to do it. And I thought I was worth more, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And then it's crazy because these guys get so much slander and a lot of negative discourse towards them over time. But I would watch First Take with Stephen A. and
Oh,
Skip Bayless all the time. Like, and
absolutely.
this is well before like social media had really taken off. Like Facebook was still like the website, and Twitter had just started, but like I didn't know how to use the internet or anything like that. It's actually quite wild how social media has evolved over the last decade and a half. And but anyway, like I was just like I would always watch them, and then just one day it clicked in my head. It's like, I want to do what those guys do. How do I do that? And then I just kind of started researching like how to get into sports media and like talk about sports for a living and stuff. And because I didn't have great grades in high school. I think I finished with like a 2.5 GPA and all that. And like I said, my ACT score was terrible. I ended up picking up more general courses online, and I eventually transferred to Eastern Illinois. And I think technically I would have been a sophomore when I joined, but I was at the age of where I was probably more of a junior. But again, my route was not a traditional thing. But I went through all this adult life stuff. I worked a really shitty job and went through a lot of just growing and trying to figure out what I want to do with my life and stuff like that. So when I talked to my mom and my dad about how I was like, I want to do this and I'm going to go to school to do this and I'll do whatever it takes. And if I'm in a bunch of college debt afterwards, whatever, at least I'll still be happy with this. It's better than what I'm doing now. And I do not want to stay here for the rest
Yeah.
of my life. So I transferred to Eastern fall of 2012, and I majored in journalism there, in more of a writing and reporting concentration. They had like broadcasting and all these like other media type things, but at the time, like I was like, I want to be like Casey Johnson, who covers the Bulls still. He was inspiration to me. I wanted to be like a beat reporter, really. And at the time, the Bulls were like honestly more of my favorite team than anything else, because it was during the Derrick Rose era. But probably say I liked all Chicago sports. And so I went to school, graduated 2015, and through the time I interned at a newspaper in Ottawa, Illinois, which is like up by like Starved Rock. If for anyone watching who doesn't know where that means, but it's not really in Chicagoland. It's about a couple hours south of Chicago. And my senior year of college, one of my professors told me, he's like, you should go work at the radio station. You have a great voice. And I was like, I wish someone would have told me this like 2 years ago, you know? And so like I did that and I actually liked it. It was a very weird adjustment at first. Like I remember doing radio for the very first time uh on the air, and it was just absolutely terrible. I hated listening to myself talk, and it was I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And then over time, it's just like you just continue to do it and you just get used to it. And you get to a point where you somehow, some way find a way to just be okay with the way you sound or whatever. And I just kept, a lot of people told me, it's like, you have a great voice to do this, you know? And that was like one of the first times of my life where someone told me like, yeah, you can do this. Like you could build a career in this. And so it was awesome to hear, but also kind of frustrating because like it was my senior year of college and I'd spent the last 2 years trying to build some sort of portfolio to go be like an actual reporter, like a beat reporter of sorts, like in the writing realm. And at the time, this is like 2014, 2015, like newspapers hadn't died yet. I mean, they still haven't technically died, but they definitely have continued to fall since that time period. And at that current time, I was just like, I don't care. All I know is doing something, talking about sports, writing about sports. I'll probably be more happier than I was beforehand when I went to school. And so because I was able to network pretty well to get that at that internship, and I networked well with a lot of my professors and stuff. I felt pretty confident when I graduated that I could find something in the media field. And then my very first job in media, I always tell people it's the job I took. It's one of the biggest regrets I've ever had because I went to a job that it's not in the field I wanted to do. Well, it was as a general assignment reporter in this small town just south of Kankakee, Illinois. And the reason that I regret it is because I took the job maybe 2 weeks after I graduated college, and I just didn't want to go. I didn't want to move home. Like I'd been out of my parents' house for years. In college, I rarely went home. I would go home for Christmas, and that's it. There were multiple summers I went and lived with friends. I never went home. I did not want to go back home. So that's why I took that job, because I just didn't want to be there. And while that while I probably would have, I guess, wish I could have changed things, took a different job, is one of my bigger regrets, because it's like I didn't put a lot of thought into it. And then I did that job for about 6 months and I hated it. And I eventually got a job in sports media, sports journalism over in Peoria, covering like high school sports and stuff in the general area, of that realm in the greater Peoria area. I worked in an office in Pekin, just outside Peoria, and that was the first sports job I got. I wrote about high school sports in that general area for about a year. Got burnt out because we didn't have a big enough staff, and I was exhausted, and I didn't make enough money to really have any kind of happiness or build any kind of equity moving forward. I tried to pick up a part-time job at a radio group, and that happened. And then the newspaper didn't want me to have both jobs. They wanted me to be full-time with one of them, and I ended up just leaving that job and sticking with the part-time gig because I got that burnt out at that newspaper gig. And then I was just like, all right, I'm just going to go over here. And then if I have to go work in retail as another part-time gig or something, I'll do it. And then it just never really transpired. And I just got really exhausted and tired. So I had to make a tough decision. And I thought, maybe this just isn't it, but maybe I can still do something within my degree to be happy. And I decided to change my focus to more like social media, marketing, stuff like that. because I felt like I was good at social media. Like at that point, I felt like I was building to understand a little bit of how to use
Mm-hmm.
the internet. And I feel like my generation might be the smartest people when it comes to, doing social media, because we grew up through the age of Facebook and MySpace and all of that. And by 2016, 2017, podcasts are taking off, and Twitter is Twitter, and Instagram, and like just all these websites blowing up, people building brands on social media and stuff. And I I felt like I could just go do social media for some company out there, and maybe one day I can get it and can find a role with like a sports franchise, or even in sports media, doing social media for whether it's 670 The Score, or ESPN 1000, stuff like that. And I end up I moved back in with my parents, or my mom, for about 3 months. And during that time, when I moved back in, I had found a job doing social media for like what is it? It's like an environmental services company. And like they renewed pipes. It was like the most environmental friendly way to renew pipes without having to dig them up and put new ones in that costs thousands and thousands of dollars, right? And the thing is the people, and this is like no offense to people who are a generation or two ahead of me, but their entire company is ran by a bunch of old people who don't know how to use the internet. And they're like, we want you to build our Facebook page and build our LinkedIn account and all these things. And they want me to do that. And like, I was like, okay, like you're giving me free will to basically do whatever I want. Cool, great. I don't understand what we do here, but I'll figure it out somehow, some way. And it was like the first time in my career where I had like a little bit of balance. Like I made more money than I ever made my entire life there at that point. And then it was like a regular 9 to 5. I had my own office, like that type of thing. And at that time I was like, this isn't what I really wanted to do, but this is going to get me by for a little bit, because again, being a reporter for high school sports and all that, like it was fun. I enjoyed doing it, but I just got burnt out so fast because there's just not a lot of money in this industry unless you go to a bigger market. And they didn't pay me enough to want to stay around, to be honest with you. So I felt like it was the right decision at the time. And yeah, so over the next couple of years, I had kind of taken a break from trying to build my brand or anything like that. And I was enjoying watching the Cubs go on multiple playoff runs and stuff like that, while
Oh,
just
those were good years.
being a regular dude. And I think it was in 2019. At that time, I met my girlfriend, who I've been together with for 6 years now. I met her in like, where I didn't meet her, but we started dating in like the fall, early or late summer, early fall of 2018. We moved in together in the summer of 2019. And that's when we moved she was from Crystal Lake, which is a northwest suburb here in Chicago. And we moved in together in like the north burbs. We're up by like Gurnee. And I picked up a job, basically doing like customer service at Camping World, which is like an RV company or whatever. I was working at their like national headquarters, and I felt like I was taking a social media job, but I really wasn't. I was kind of just like a guy to get a customer to another guy, but I would be answering like Facebook comments and Twitter comments, and like it was always just people pissed off that Camping World messed up their
Oh
RV.
no.
But it got exhausting. I was over it after like maybe 4 months, to be honest with you. But man, this is in 2019 when I took that job. Like I think it was around July, and then the pandemic happened in 2020. But before the pandemic hit, I think going into 2020, I asked a buddy of mine that I went to college with, like if he wanted to start a podcast, because at that time, like everyone was starting their own podcast for some reason. And I was like, well, I miss talking about Chicago sports and the Cubs and stuff like that. And I was just like, if this blows up into something cool, if it doesn't, then whatever. Like I'm just here because I just want to talk about sports with my friends. And at that time, like a lot of my friends didn't live where I lived and stuff. And so it just kind of, I felt like it was a good way to just even stay close with a lot of college friends I had. And so we started this podcast, me and my buddy. We called it the Sky's Falling Podcast, Chicago Sports Podcast. And it was just, we called it that because Chicago sports were so terrible at the time.
Oh, fitting. Yeah.
The Cubs were trending down. You know, the Bears were bad. You know, the Blackhawks hadn't made the playoffs in like 5 years, and the Bulls, you know, they had been bad since the Rose era ended. And you know, me and him were Cubs fans, so we didn't really talk a ton about the Sox at all. I didn't want to fake it. So yeah, like that's why we called it that. It was like everything sucked, and so we would do one show a week at the beginning of 2020. We started very first episode, New Year's Day 2020, and you know, so we were like, oh yeah, we're going to be entering baseball season and all these things. And then I actually was in Cancun at the time when the NBA and the NCAA tournament were canceled because of COVID, and I just remember coming back into O'Hare from Cancun with my girlfriend and her family, and just like the world was just completely different than what it was in Cancun. And so like came back, the world's on fire, things are getting canceled, and I'm just like, holy, like what is going on? My job tells me that, yeah, you're gonna have to do your job remote for a little bit. 4 days after they tell me that, they laid me off. And so I didn't have a job. The world's on fire because of the pandemic, all these things. And so that kind of like, I had nothing else to do, and I was collecting unemployment, and I started driving for like Grubhub to like make money, you know, because at the time too, like essential workers, people were like giving massive tips to people because of people willing to go out and deliver food and stuff during a really scary time, right? So I was actually making more money doing that for like a month or two because people were so giving at the beginning of the pandemic with how everyone was pretty scared, you know. And so I was doing that. I like really started like embracing the whole podcast thing because I was bored. I had nothing to do. And I started writing about the Cubs for this website called ontapsportsnet.com. They have a good Cubs podcast called Cubs on Tap, and they asked me to be part of it. And I still have friends that work there. It's definitely a side gig for a lot of those guys, but it was just one of those Chicago sports media websites, you know, a blog of sorts. And yeah, I was just bored, you know, like, and I applied on, and they like let me in and everything, and I really embraced it because I just had nothing else going on. And so I'd write some blogs and stuff like that, and I'd jump on their podcast with them sometimes. And I don't know how I did it. I think the very first like real viral tweet that I ever sent was me listing all the players for the Cubs who wore 21 after Sammy Sosa. And it was like during the that 30 for 30 documentary, Long Gone Summer, about Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, the 98 chase or whatever. And I like that was probably one of the first viral tweets I've ever sent. Like it took me a really long time to understand really how to build my own personal brand. And around that time is when I figured it out. And next thing you know, I started gaining followers. You know, I don't know. I remember when I hit 1,000 on Twitter, and I just felt so special. And yeah, so I wrote and did content with them for all of the rest of 2020, all for free. They didn't pay me anything. While delivering food and all and you know, collecting unemployment. I ended up finding a full-time job in Evanston. I was doing social media for a Greek organization. I was in a fraternity in college. It was Sigma Alpha Epsilon, and their national headquarters is in Evanston, which is where Northwestern is. And they were looking for a communications coordinator to basically do social media for them. And I like applied, like when I saw it like on Indeed or whatever, I had never applied so fast because it was like, oh, this is right up my alley. Like I can do this. Like I think I'd actually like doing this, and like it wasn't far from where I lived and stuff like that. And yeah, I ended up getting the job, and I started working there in December of 2020. And then but like I didn't really stop doing any of the content stuff I was doing on the side. I was still doing my podcast and then I started really contributing with the Cubs podcast with On Tap, especially once baseball came back later in 2020, and then I picked up that job. And going into 2021, I mean, I was just working full time and doing what I could with on the side for free. And me and my buddy I was doing my other podcast with, it started to just kind of die out a little bit, largely because life and stuff like that. But the thing I always give that podcast credit to is that I met people through it that led to me getting here. So I want to say 2021, I worked full time in Evanston, and then I was doing their Cubs podcast and all that stuff. I still remember doing I'd never been so pissed off when the Cubs traded Anthony Rizzo a day before the trade deadline that year.
That was a rough year.
I still remember like doing that show with my guy Ron Luce, who still does content with that team or that website. And yeah, so anyway, by that time, and mid to late 2021, like I'm pushing 2,000 followers on Twitter, and I feel like I'm somewhat building a brand. I think people on Cubs Twitter are starting to get an idea of who I am, and I don't know if they had taken me seriously or not, but I don't know. People liked what I was saying about the Cubs, and it was crazy in many ways. And so move a little forward to 2022. I remember I was working remote on a Friday. It was around 3:30. This guy, his name's Kevin Kaduk, who works here at All City. He was hired at the time before CHGO launched. He was hired to be the head of content for CHGO and to basically hire all the talent to come to CHGO. And I don't know if you know a lot about All City, but they started in Denver, their DMVR, then they expanded to PHNX, and then they decided they want to come to Chicago. And I really didn't know anything about the company at all, but I was at home working remote, just kind of not really working at all on a Friday afternoon. And I get a DM from Kevin, and I met Kevin through doing my podcast with my friend that I started back at the beginning of 2020. And he's like, "Hey, I got a cool opportunity. If you're interested, I'd love to talk to you about it." And like, I had met Kevin like remotely, like when he came and did my show a couple times, but like I didn't really know him. And so I was like, this is weird. I was like, whatever, fine. I gave him my phone number. He calls me. He starts pitching this thing to me about coming to work for CHGO and how like we're gonna have this whole studio and West Loop, and like we're gonna talk. We want you to talk about the Cubs 5 days a week for an hour, like all these things. And he brings in our general manager, Jake Flanagan, and he's like, he's spinning everything to me too. And I'm like, this is a really sick joke. Like this is hard to believe right now that you're offering this to me. And like, I told them that like I needed to talk to my girlfriend and like my mom about this and everything. Cause at the time in my head, I was like, this feels too good to be true. And also like, I knew like based off what they're saying, I was like, yeah, it is like a startup. And so it's like, there's a lot of risk in doing that. And yeah, so I think I gave it 4 hours, and I ended up texting Kevin or Jake or whatever,
long deliberating process.
and told them that I'm taking it, because it was just like, it felt like it was finally the moment in my career that I had been working for. That's why I told you everything about how I grew up, how I didn't know what I wanted to do, all these things. Like that moment, I still think about that day a lot when I think like on my bad days here, or if I'm exhausted from doing stuff. Like I think about the day Kevin DM'd me on Twitter and he's like, "Hey, I have a job opportunity for you if you're interested in hearing about it," and like, it's something that to this day, we're 4 years in, sometimes I still can't believe that it happened. There's so many great personalities, talents. This industry is so hard to get into. It's so hard to make a name. And like, not only they could put anyone in, but it's like, are you good at what you do? Right. And I do genuinely feel like I'm good at what I do. I don't like to say that I'm the show or whatever. Like, I do think that me and Luke and also Ryan, before he unfortunately got laid off, like, we all had a unique part of our show. And like, one of the cool things that I loved about our show when it was just the three of us, when they recruited people to do these shows, like, the three of us didn't personally know each other. Like, I knew who Luke Stuckmeyer was. I watched him on my television in college doing Cubs pre and post game with David Kaplan, right? But I didn't know Ryan and I didn't know Luke personally. And so it was just like the difference between us and everyone else, like CHGO Bulls, Peck and Big Dave, they'd been doing Locked On together for years. You know, Adam Hogue and Mark Carmen, they all knew each other, and Nicholas Moriano, they all knew each other through the industry. You know, our Blackhawks guys, they all knew who each other was. They had talked to each other before, and even our White Sox guys, same thing, right? Like, everyone knew each other, but like, I did not personally know Luke, and I didn't personally know Ryan. I didn't even know who Corey. I knew who Corey and Brendan were, but I didn't personally know them. And so, like, for them to just like take a big risk, honestly, and being like, all right, we're going to throw these darts and hope they hit. And then the way that it hit, it's really impressive. And I think it's a testament to just how good me, Luke, and Ryan were when we launched and how we have gotten to this point. And it's unfortunate about how we had to let Ryan go. I still talk to him all the time. But to bring it back around to me, and this has been such a long-winded answer.
No, we got the story. That's what I wanted. This is the story.
Right. It's such a big part of my career being able to work here, and I don't take it for granted. And I hope my story is an inspiration for people who want to do this. It's not easy. I would literally tell anyone, if they want to do what I do not go to school. Just try and build your own brand. Start your own YouTube channel, niche down to one particular thing and build it from there. And if someone comes and buys it one day, great. Or, you know, even if you can just make a little bit of side money on the side, and who knows, if you grow it well enough and it builds and you're able to start, you know, people start wanting to sell ads to you or whatever to make money, like whatever. I would never, to do what I do at this point, and how being a content creator is like kind of like what everyone's trying to do now. I would not tell anyone to try and go to college to do this stuff. I would just say, if you want to do something in sports, maybe go study sports management, or, you know, sports management, and then like maybe minor in like broadcast media or something like that, and go from there. Like, it's a very, very long, tough road. You're told no a lot. You get very deflated a lot. But when you get there, if you get there, it's a very rewarding moment. And I just feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I get to work in Chicago. I get to work in one of the biggest media markets in the country. And I'm really blessed, man. It's to come from where I came from with you know, not a lot of influence and building a life at all. Like, it's genuinely like a very rewarding thing that I built this all by myself. No one helped me get anywhere other than just the fact that I networked incredibly well just by starting my own podcast, right? And got here. So yeah, man, like, it's been a long road, but it's one that I certainly appreciate and always have to remind myself, you know, on some of my worst days.
Well, Cody, you know what that says to me? You are an underdog who has truly overcome. And your story is beyond inspiring. And anyone out there, if you're thinking about these things, listen to what he just said, because he's going to save you a lot of time with what you're saying. Instead of going through the conventional ways. We live in an unconventional world, right? Where it's creativity, it's passion, it's you going all in, which is what you've just said. You went all in on yourself. You bet on yourself, like these guys that are free agents. And we'll talk about Justin Turner in a minute, but